So do you mind just kind of introducing yourself, just so for anyone that doesn't know you, kind of where you're from as well?
Yeah, so my name's Brandon Daniels. I was born up in Connecticut in Stamford. So in terms of my industry, in the sportscasting industry, it's pretty ironic that I was born there before everything really got up there, and now I'm sitting in a good place. But I was there for about 12 years, and I moved down to Florida, down in southwest Florida, for about 6 years. Then I went overseas to study in China. So I finished my high school years in China, took a gap year there, just tried to figure out what I wanted to do. And then I found, Full Sail on a layover of all things. And now I'm back in Orlando, back in Florida. It's pretty crazy, but I've been around a couple places.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. So you moved to China when you were roughly like a junior, is that right?
Yeah, before my junior year, both my parents were teachers. They decided that they wanted a change. They had been teaching in the U.S. for a good amount of time. My mom had been teaching for about 20 years at that point. My dad only for a few. But they both wanted to change. They wanted to figure something out. They wanted to try something new. And they decided they wanted to teach overseas. The first original plan was we had almost gone to the Middle East as a family. And that fell through kind of last minute. And so my mom was like, why don't we go to China? And I'm like, I've never been outside the U.S. in my life, so I don't have an opinion. So we ended up going to China, and it was a great 3 years, 2 with my family. They had ended up leaving. My last year I spent alone there, and it was a great 3 years. It was an incredible experience. And to be back here, it kind of opened my eyes to the rest of the world. It was super cool.
So you mentioned a gap year. So what did that gap year look like? Were your parents still around? Had they moved back, or were they were you living with them? What was that situation like?
So after my second year, after I graduated high school, my parents, they already had plans to leave. They wanted to teach abroad in another place, to find another part of the world. They ended up going to Costa Rica. And so the original plan was my sister and I were going to live together because she and I were both at the time classical musicians. And so we wanted some more time to be able to prepare for auditions. For most people who don't know, in classical music, our auditions are held in November to December, and then a second one in January/February of the coming year. So if I wanted to get into school, say fall 2021, I would have started auditioning in December 2020. So we wanted to take the extra time to do that. We were still in China. We were still working with our teachers. So we just thought it was a natural situation. But last minute, my sister decided she was going to go to Costa Rica. So I was there by myself for that gap year. Just trying to work while I was trying to audition for music school. And then, that kind of fizzled out towards audition time. And then I didn't really have a plan for the rest of that year. So I was kind of just working odd jobs until, the elephant in the room happened, which was COVID. So now I'm back in Orlando because of that.
Okay, and that kind of leads me into my next question of like, did you ever, you're in China, you had been there for a long time, so you may have gotten homesick while your family was there. But I'm really curious, like when your family left, did you ever get homesick, and like, how did you cope with that if you did?
It's funny because in those 2 years, that became my home. Like I still see it as my home base. I see it's crazy because I lived there for 2 years, 3 years total. At that time it was only 2, but I had done so much with so many great people that it became my home base. I didn't think of Connecticut as my home base. I didn't think of Florida as my home base. I still think of it today as my home. So for me, I was still home. And so I guess it was, my parents and my sister were telling me that year that they were homesick of China. So it was really the opposite of what you would think. I never felt homesick at all because it was my home. So it was kind of weird because of that transition that I had, lived with my family for, 18 years, of course. And then all of a sudden I had flipped, and it was kind of it was hard to get used to at first, but again, it was my home. It was a lot easier than it would be in a different situation.
So was there ever because I hear like Chinese, the government can be really, really strict, and like, especially like the police, like they just like handle breaking the law differently than we do here. Did you ever have like maybe like a scary moment where you're like, I'm a little bit nervous for my safety because I did something, I don't know what the repercussions are going to be. Right. Was there ever a time like that?
So let's break this down. I'll keep this as short as possible.
Okay.
So my friend and I, we were really close friends, and I remember it was like the first few days that we had met, because we had lived in the same apartment complex. His mom was a teacher, my parents were teachers. We rode on the same bus to go to school, and so we kind of became friends really quickly just because we had been around each other, and we're both kind of the adventurous type, but never really had the opportunity to do that, whether it was the people around us or the fact that we just didn't have it in the other places that we lived. And we're both also big history buffs. So in our city, it used to be controlled by the Germans in World War I, and then by the Japanese leading up to World War II. So there's a lot of military history in our city. And so we had heard from one of our teachers that there are abandoned military bunkers. We're like, okay, we need to go find these, right? It needs to happen. This is the coolest thing ever. And so we had talked to that teacher. He's like, oh, there's probably a couple of them. I've seen a couple, been in a couple. I'm like, okay, cool. So let's go out and find those two. We ended up finding 8 of them. And so at this point, like we used to go every Saturday. It was a thing for about 2 months where we go every single Saturday and we try to find one of them. And so we ended up finding one 8 Saturdays in a row. And one of the last times we went, we found this like shaft, and we could feel air coming out of it. Okay, it's ventilation shaft. Perfect. How do we find the entrance to this place? So we kind of looked around for the afternoon. We thought about like going back to grab camping stuff just so we could like keep going, but we didn't end up doing that. We left. And we went back the next weekend. We're like, we really want to find this. And so we couldn't find the entrance. And so we're like, what if we just went down the ventilation shaft? So in my dumb little, 17-year-old head, I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with this. It's abandoned, right? Like, there's no problem. Like, parts of the bars were already like pulled. Like, we didn't think in our head at all that we were doing anything wrong, because we had gone in all of these other ones and like there was nothing happening except for the occasional cave spider that could, come out and bite us. But like we had never seen a person before. So we're like, there's no way there's people here. The one thing we didn't take into account, which is I'll get to in a second, is that there could be something wrong with what we were doing. So we brought in one of our other teachers. He was an art teacher. He was also a huge climber, hiker. He's just kind of an outdoor buff. So we brought him in. He's like, what do you think we should do? He's like, well, we could probably just rappel down the side of it. And we're like, okay, perfect. So we go and we get all the rappelling stuff. And our teacher, he starts to rappel down there. And we're holding the rope there. We're just kind of talking to each other. My friend and I were like, all right, let's figure this out. What are we going to do? I hope it's super cool down there so we can go too. And like a couple minutes later, our teacher, he just starts pulling on the rope. We're like, oh, that was our signal if he wanted to get up. And he just kind of tug on it and we would come up. But he started like rapidly pulling on that thing. So we're like, oh, okay, maybe there's something wrong. So he goes up. He's like, we got to get out of here. We go sprint to hide, we just sprint to go. We went to another cave and we just or another military bunker. And we went and hid and just talked. He's like, let me tell you what I saw. So he said he got down there, he took a turn, and then it was industrial lighting, glass doors, and he saw people at the end. And so he just dipped and went out. So we're like, okay. The problem is right next to this mountain was a military base that we just did not even take account for. We thought it was like a government building. We had never seen really people go in and out, but it was a military building and we almost got screwed hardcore. That was one of the many stories that we have had, but I'll say that was probably the scariest moment that I've had for sure.
Wow. Okay. So, but it's home base, but man, there's some scary stuff that goes down in China. Moving forward, would you go back?
Oh, 100%. I think it's tough because I left during COVID and I left on terms that I didn't want to leave under, mostly because I had to. I was told by the government that I had to, right? So it wasn't something that I wanted to do. If COVID never happened, I would still be there right now. I wouldn't be in Orlando. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be anywhere close to the United States. I would still be where I was last year. And it just so happened that there was a global pandemic that, everything that could have gone wrong for me just started, connecting together and it forced me to leave. And so part of it, I want to go back just because of the closure sense of it. Whether I want to work there or not is still up in the air for me. I would always leave that open as an option because, again, it is still somewhere that I consider home. But, the other part of it is that I never had closure. I never really got to say goodbye to everyone. I never got to just have that moment where I'm like, I know that I'm leaving, and I know that I probably won't be back. And at this point, I still can't even go back if I wanted to. So I still don't have that sense where I'm like, okay, that's it, I'm done. It's still really open-ended. So that's part of the reason why I want to go back. But overall, I still want to leave the door open. We don't know yet.
Well, Brandon, I want to say thank you so much for coming and having a chat with
anytime,
me.
man.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I wish you all the luck in getting back to China and finding your home again.